Hi everyone, it's Talbot here for you. We're going to be diving into our World War One and our global conflict unit. So our first topic, we're going to kind of set the scene of what was going on at World War One. Look at the causes, the fact of why this war was so deadly and why was it considered a total war, and then looking at kind of who the winner as we set our stage really for this unit is kind of divided into the different world wars, but it's really kind of one ongoing conflict. It's going to kind of set the scene for the modern world we live in today. So, don't need you to take notes on this part, but as you are taking notes, remember to kind of use that study guide to guide what you should be taking notes on. But I always have to give you a little idea of what's going on in the different parts of the world at this time. So, we've got independent countries have been founded in the Americas. In particular, the United States is becoming kind of the dominant player there. So you've got kind of they've said in the early 1800s, hey, Europeans, you stay out of the Americas as these new Latin American countries are becoming independent. And then they're further later on in the late 1800s are going to say, like, we'll get involved if you're, messing around a little bit. So, and we look, meanwhile, though, Europe is still the main powers in the world. So they still got these large overseas empires. So we're seeing their empires expand in Africa. We've seen in Unit 4 the empires expand and influence in China and in India and the Pacific. And as those empires, those overseas or maritime empires are sometimes called, are expanding, your old school land-based empires like the Ottomans and the Austro-Hungarians and the Chinese are all weakening. So we're kind of seeing a shift in the global power, fueled largely by the age of exploration and the Industrial Revolution. Uh, One of the big reasons why those larger land-based empires are starting to break apart is going to be because A, those countries or empires didn't industrialize as fast, and so they're behind on technology. And B, there's this nationalism, this sense of self-determination. Our group of people that are similar ethnically, language-wise, religiously, we should be independent. So within these diverse empires, you're going to see this push for self-determination, this push for independence that's going to weaken a lot of the empires. Of course, we mentioned the Industrial Revolution already. It's really changing everything. Which countries are most powerful? It's going to be changing military. It's going to change societies. We're going to see things like socialism is going to be on the rise. We're going to see labor reforms. We're going to see women involved in the workforce in major ways. So big societal-wide changes. Government types are changing. All that because of the Industrial Revolution. The final thing that's kind of changing as we get towards World War One, there's kind of three new big powers that are coming on the scene. It's the United States. It's stretched coast to coast now, probably the second most industrialized country in the world. It's gotten through its own civil war, so now it's more unified and strong. Japan has undergone the Japanese miracle of rapid industrialization, and Germany has now been unified and is kind of this big colossus in the middle of Europe, industrializing, becoming more powerful. So now would be a time to start taking notes as we think about, okay, there are four main causes we're going to refer to with World War One. And the first cause being militarism. That would be the M of Maine. This is where you glorify the military. And so this goes beyond loving the troops. And it goes to not only do we love the troops, but we're going to support them. We're going to spend more and more money on them. We're going to build up our armies. We're going to build up our navies. Um, but it's also going to go into the point where we're not going to question the generals. We're going to say the generals know best. We're going to let them do whatever. We're going to trust them to do its best for us. And so, kind of politicians are going to cede some power to the generals. And we're going to talk about, wars, this heroic struggle, great way to glorify things. And, you got to go and you got to join if you're a young man because this war could be over quick if one breaks out. And this is the way for you to make a name for yourself. So, it's that big love affair of the military. And we see this huge increase in military spending, particularly across Europe. We don't see this in the United States so much, but we will see it in Europe. Germany is going to begin building up its navy. That's a huge threat to Great Britain, which had always had the most powerful navy. France, which had used its army to conquer most of Europe in the past, they're building up their army. Germany's building up their army. Austria-Hungary is building up their army. The Russians are building up their armies. So big push to militarism. And you can kind of see that on this map. So we're talking about millions of dollars in today's money. And you can kind of see not so much, yes, the numbers are big, but the bigger thing is if you look from 1908 to 1913, in every single country, it keeps going up and up and up. And when we get to the war, the countries in green are going to be in one alliance, and the countries in red are going to be in another alliance. And the war is going to kick off in 1914. And you can be like, well, what did these idiots think was going to happen if they kept building up their military? Of course, we were going to see war break up. So a few things. Number one, it's really hard if you are France to not build up your military when you see Germany's building up their military. And if France is going to build up its military, well, then Britain, which has long-standing beef with them, they got to build up theirs. And so you can see very quickly how, in order to maintain that balance power, to protect yourself, you've got to build up your military. The other side of that is you're also building the greatest military your country's ever known. So there's this belief that because it's the best military we've ever had, then we're going to have no problem should a war break out. The problem is everybody's building the best military they've ever had. This is going to lead to some problems. The second thing is because the need to defend yourself, you need to get friends in case of a war. So you're going to see these alliances. That's the A of the main causes of World War I. In Europe at the time, following Napoleon, the big push is to maintain a balance of power. So you don't ever want one country to be more powerful than the others. So again, if you find out that Germany's becoming friends with Austria-Hungary, well, then, Britain and France, you better become an alliance and you better find some other friends. And so you're making this web of alliances so that should you be attacked, you've got friends come and help you. Again, that makes sense from a defensive standpoint. The challenge is these alliances can kind of tangle you up because Germany, you don't really care what happens in Serbia, the Serbian part of Austria-Hungary, but if the Russians care about what happens to Serbia and the Serbians are in this deal with Austria-Hungary, well then Germany is now in a conflict with Russia. And that's how World War I is going to kind of kick off. And now, meanwhile, Britain, you had nothing to do with any of that. Now you're going to get pulled into a war with the Germans and France as well. So that entangling, you can get pulled into stuff that you didn't really there. Now we mentioned before a couple of those new power players. You notice a couple of them, they're not on here. So Japan's not in the alliance, nor is the United States. Japan's going to join once the war kicks off, essentially just from an opportunistic saying, hey, Germany's fighting this war. They're going to be occupied. They're going to be busy with their military. Let's go take their islands in the Pacific. And that's what they do. The United States says, listen, guys, we are on a different continent. We have, going back to George Washington times, we have not got involved in what's going on in Europe. We're not about to start now. But hey, we will sell you some stuff. And when they start selling stuff again, this is before, large cargo planes, you've got to sail it there. And German submarines are going to start sinking on American ships. So the United States is eventually going to get pulled into the war, about into the second half of it. But not there in the beginning. We're not going to get into the actual fighting of the war too much. Germany's got this problem of, they have an enemy to the east in Russia and enemies to the west in France, and eventually Italy's going to flip sides, so you're going to have problems to the south there as well. The third cause of World War I is going to be imperialism, and there's kind of these rivalries over who's going to control different parts of the world, whether that's Asia, whether that's Africa. And again, the big idea was you want to have a balance of power. You don't want one European country to be more powerful than the others. So as more and more of the map is carved up, you're going to have more and more chance for conflict. That's one element of imperialism. The other thing is the colonies provide more resources and more people to the war effort. So an overseas colony like India can provide resources and troops and laborers to the British Army. And the French can pull from their African colonies. And so, same thing for the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians and the Ottomans. So having these larger empires, you're able to pull in more troops, more laborers, more resources. And we're going to see fighting take place all over the world. It's mostly in Europe, but we do see conflict in Africa. We do see conflict around some Pacific islands. And so that's going to be one of the causes. In the later effects, we're going to see as those old empires are defeated, the Ottomans and the Austro-Hungarians, carving up of that old empire is going to set a stage for World War II, but also kind of this decolonization movement, which we'll hit in Unit 6. This here shows soldiers from India and soldiers from Africa being involved for France and for Britain. All right, the fourth and final big cause we're going to talk about for World War I is called nationalism. We hit on this in Unit 4, but we're going to touch on it again here. So nationalism, it starts at a level of patriotism that's good and healthy. You're proud of your country. You love your fellow countrymen. That's great. It can also become a justification for war, though. Because you love your country, you're going to support your country in a war. Because our country is great, we can beat other countries in a war, and we have the right to beat them because we're better than them. You've also got, we've talked about these multinational ethnic empires like the Ottomans and like the Austro-Hungarians, and they're going to have this nationalist movement, and this push for independence is going to cause them to break up. The big initial cause of the war is going to be an assassination by some Serbians who are part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but they don't want to be part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They want to have self-determination, and so they're going to assassinate the prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is going to kick into place all those entangling alliances. Uh, we see people in the Ottoman Empire, the Arabs want their own empire, but it also affects some of the Allied powers, like the British, and they're going to have to deal with the Irish in the middle of the war. We can see on the map on the right here, the Austro-Hungarian Empire had all these different ethnic groups, and that kind of is what's going to make it weak. On the left, you're going to see the Ottoman Empire, and you can just see the Ottoman Empire has been shrinking before this war, and that's because of the nationalism in Egypt, the nationalism in Libya, and now we're going to see the nationalism coming from the Arabs here on the Arabian Peninsula. So how does all this play into the causes? Well, you've got the attempts to gain colonies, so there's your imperialism, alliance systems that are entangling things. You've got this nationalism where we're upset because we're French and the Germans beat us in a war not that long ago. We've got militarism and this arms race, building up the armies and navies. We've got this nationalism, self-determination movement, this pride in our country, and all of it sets the scenes for when one guy gets assassinated, a global conflict is going to kick off. Once that global conflict kicks off, it becomes the deadliest war in human history up to that point. About 16 million people are going to die, billions of dollars in damage. And so before, a single day in World War One, you could lose as many soldiers as you would lose in an entire war years before. So a single day of a single battle could kill more people than an entire war did before. So why did the people put up with it? Well, with all of these things, this war was unlike any other because it was on an industrial scale. This is now we're going to see machine guns and gas and airplanes and submarines and all this modern stuff. And it's a threat. You're not talking about who's going to be the heir to the throne. You're talking about is your nation going to survive? So it is a fight to the death. Because of the modern technology, we're going to see this deal of trench warfare, where it's the only way to kind of hold your ground was to dig these trenches, and it causes the war to be fought, over just a matter of 100 yards at a time. The war is going to drag on with massive, massive casualties as a result. And so because this is a war to the death, we're going to call it a total war. You're going to dedicate all the resources to winning this war. You're going to include your men fighting. You're going to include children collecting scrap metal. You're going to include women working in the factories. You're going to be trying to convince them that this war is worth it through propaganda. You're going to be asking people to sacrifice, what kind of stuff they can get. And you're going to use all that industrialization you've done before. Now you're going to be making war materials with it. So the propaganda is really important. You've got to get everyone to sacrifice. But the dark side of propaganda is it's also going to be dehumanizing the enemy, which again makes it justifiable to kill that entire nation. Women have a really important role here as they are going to be fighting in these jobs that were kind of left by the men. They're also going to serve as nurses and all sorts of other support roles throughout the military. And because of this involvement in the war, positive for women is they're going to be able to push for more political rights, particularly the right to vote. There's going to be tension, though, when the men come back for more and want their old jobs back. So when the war comes to an end, the winners are Britain, France, kind of the Russians, because they kind of leave halfway through, and the United States, who joined kind of sort of halfway through. When the Russians left, it could have been a big turning point, but the Americans kind of filled the void. The losers are going to be the Germans, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottomans. And so even though there's victors and losers, there's this huge sense of disillusionment we're going to get into where there was all this fighting and really the lines on the map don't change that much. Your country wasn't that much more stabilized. And this leads to big resentment from the leaders that got you into this war in the first place that led to all this carnage and bloodshed. And what was it all worth? Was it worth it? And so you have this generation that will be forever affected, called the lost generation, who are feeling that sense of disillusionment.